You're breathing through an oxygen mask at 28,000 feet. The trail ahead is completely covered in slick blue ice. To keep climbing, you have to step over the frozen body of a man. He's wearing bright green boots. He's been lying there 20 years. Every climber uses his corpse as a mile marker. Will you be the next one? Mount Everest is heavily marketed as the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. Thousands of wealthy amateurs spend their entire lives training for the summit. They pay massive fortunes just for the right to stand on the roof of the world. But the glossy brochures do not show the actual reality of the final climb. Just below the summit lies a specific stretch of the mountain. It is known as Rainbow Valley. The name sounds incredibly peaceful, almost magical. It is actually a literal graveyard. It gets its name from the bright red, blue, and yellow down jackets covering the steep ice. Those jackets belong to dead climbers. Over 200 frozen bodies are permanently scattered across this high-altitude ridge. They are perfectly preserved by the freezing wind. They are completely visible to every single person making the final push to the top. You cannot look away. You have to walk directly past them. To understand why these bodies are simply left in the snow, you have to understand the brutal physics of the mountain. Rainbow Valley sits deep inside the deaths. This is an altitude above 8,000 meters. At this height, human biology fundamentally breaks down. There is only a third of the oxygen compared to sea level. Every breath you take provides less oxygen than your body burns just to stand still. Your cells are actively dying. Your brain begins to slowly swell inside your skull. Digestion completely stops because your body redirects all blood to your heart and lungs. You are essentially running on a ticking biological clock. You have a very small window of time to reach the top and get back down. If you stop moving, you will never start again. When a climber collapses in the death zone, the brutal math of survival takes over. A rescue at 28,000 feet is physically impossible. A living climber is already fighting just to lift their own boots in the deep snow. Carrying an extra 200 pounds of dead weight is a guaranteed death sentence. You cannot drag a body down a steep, icy cliff. Helicopters cannot fly this high. The air is simply too thin for the rotors to generate any lift. If you die up here, the mountain keeps you. You become a permanent part of. In the spring of 1996, the mountain claimed a young Indian climber named Tswang Paljor. He was a strong, highly experienced border police officer. He was caught in a massive, historic blizzard near the summit. The wind was howling at over 100 miles per hour. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. Exhausted and freezing, Tswang crawled into a small limestone cave just off the main climbing route. He curled into a tight fetal position to escape the brutal wind. He pulled his arms tight against his chest. He froze to death, right there in the dark. He was wearing a pair of bright neon green climbing boots. For the next 2 decades, his body never moved. The harsh environment essentially mummified him in the ice. But that cave sat directly on the main path to the summit. Every single climber pushing for the top had to walk right past his boots. They had to step over his frozen legs. Green Boots Cave became a universally recognized waypoint. Sherpa guides would tell their clients to check their oxygen levels when they reached the boots. His tragedy was entirely reduced to a geographical coordinate, but passing a dead man is a heavy psychological anchor. You are staring directly at the physical evidence of failure. He was just as strong as you. He had the exact same equipment, yet he is locked in the ice, and you are trying to walk past him, and that is when the reality of the mountain breaks your confidence. But Tswang's story is only the beginning of the valley. The story of Francis Arsentieff is pure psychological horror. Francis was an American climber attempting to make history in 1998. She wanted to be the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. She reached the top with her husband, Sergei. They celebrated briefly on the roof of the world, but the descent was immediately disastrous. Frances began to suffer from severe altitude sickness. Without bottled oxygen, her brain was rapidly starving. She lost her physical coordination and collapsed in the snow, deep in the death zone. Sergei realized she couldn't walk. He stayed with her as the sun began to drop behind the peaks.
but the freezing temperatures forced a desperate, terrifying decision. He had to leave her behind to go get extra oxygen and a rescue team from the lower camps. He promised he would come back. He climbed down into the dark. The next morning, two different climbers were pushing toward the summit. Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd were navigating the steep ridge. Suddenly, they saw a flash of bright purple fabric in the snow ahead. It was Frances. She was lying flat on her back, completely exposed to the violent wind. Her skin was pale and severely frostbitten. As the climbers got closer, they realized something absolutely impossible. She was still breathing. She had survived the entire night completely alone in the death zone. Cases like this strip away every illusion of human control. And if untangling this dark reality is why you watch, subscribe to Evidence Zero, because what happened next is the heaviest burden a climber can carry. Ian and Kathy immediately dropped their heavy gear and rushed to her side. Frances was barely conscious. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at the strangers and whispered a single desperate sentence. "Don't leave me." Those 3 words paralyzed the human soul. They tried to lift her. They tried to massage warmth back into her freezing limbs, but Frances was completely limp. She was paralyzed by the cold and the severe lack of oxygen. Ian and Kathy spent over an hour trying to drag her through the deep snow. It was completely useless. They were violently draining their own oxygen supplies. They were losing their core body heat rapidly. The brutal laws of the mountain suddenly became entirely real. If they stayed with her, all 3 of them would die on. They had to make an impossible choice. They had to look a living, breathing woman directly in the eye. They had to tell her they were walking away. They turned their backs on her and climbed down the mountain. They heard her pleading as they walked away in the snow. They had to live with that sound for the rest of their lives. Frances died later that day in the freezing wind. Her husband, Sergei, never made it back to her. His body was later found hundreds of feet below the ridge. He had slipped from the icy cliff while desperately trying to climb back up to save his wife. For 9 years, Frances remained perfectly visible on the main trail. Her bright purple jacket earned her the haunting nickname, Sleeping Beauty. Hundreds of climbers walked right past her frozen face. Some even snapped photographs of her body as a morbid souvenir. The sheer disrespect eventually became too much to bear. In 2007, Ian Woodall returned. He climbed back the death zone. He couldn't bring her home, but he could give her peace. He found Frances exactly where he had left her. He wrapped her frozen body in a large American flag. With the help of a local Sherpa, he carefully pushed her over the edge of the steep. She fell completely out of sight. She was finally removed from the tourist path. This is the unspoken reality of Valley. It forces humans to completely abandon their own humanity. Down at sea level, if you see a dying person, you call an ambulance. You stop and help. At 28,000 feet, empathy is a massive liability. It will literally kill you. Modern commercial climbing has made the situation infinitely worse. Every spring, hundreds of wealthy amateurs pay massive fees to stand in line at the summit. They create dangerous, slow-moving traffic jams in the death zone. People are waiting for hours on a narrow ridge. They're slowly running out of bottled oxygen. And while they wait, they're staring right at the dead. They step over the frozen limbs of climbers who made the exact same gamble. Some climbers simply ignore the bodies. Others are completely mentally broken by the sight. They realize the mountain does not care about their money. It does not care about their expensive training gear. If a storm rolls in or an oxygen valve freezes, they will simply become the next neon jacket in the valley. But the mountain is slowly changing. Climate change is actively warming the Himalayas. The heavy glaciers and deep snowpacks are rapidly melting. And as the ice recedes, the mountain is giving up its dead. Bodies that have been buried under the snow for 50 years are suddenly emerging. Frozen hands are sticking out of the melting ice near the lower camps. Sherpas are now tasked with the incredibly dangerous job of cleaning up the high-altitude graveyard. Whenever possible, they try to chip the bodies out of the hard ice and drag them down. It is brutal, exhausting labor. It costs thousands of dollars and risks even more human lives. But some bodies are wedged too deeply in the solid rock. Some are simply too high up to ever be moved safely. Green Boots was eventually pushed slightly out of sight by unknown climbers, but there are always new landmarks taking his place. The cycle of ambition and death never stops. People will always want to conquer the highest point on Earth. They want the glory of the summit photograph. They want to conquer nature. But nature doesn't negotiate, it just waits. The summit of Everest offers the greatest view in the world. You can literally see the curve of the Earth. But to get there, you have to walk through a graveyard. You have to step over the people who didn't make it. They reached the top of the world. They did what they came to do, but they never walked back down.